Yeah, a beautiful talk, lovely. I wish all my college professors were like that. You say we need to get away, abandon our human-centeredness, homocentricity. Now, I've been working with the Han Chinese, who have a 5,000-year culture of human-centeredness. How do we work with them in zoos?
I should nuance that, John. We need to get away from the dysfunctional human-centerednesses. They're the ones that promote arrogance, distance, that promote language like humans and animals. We do know we're primates, mammals, vertebrates. Walk down the thing. Walk down the list. We know that. We're all acutely aware of that. And yet we continue in that pattern. That's a dysfunctional human-centeredness. That's something we can come away with. All of us violate that. But zoos could lead us on this. Zoos could lead us on this. So can education. But we're decades away from that. So it's the dysfunctional human-centerednesses. There are some exquisite human-centerednesses. Some of the humanities, some of our praising of our literature, and it's in a way taking pride in your family can be a very functional, integrating feature, or in your community, or in your religious tradition. But when you couple it with exclusivism, exclusion of all other living beings, now you get into the dysfunctions. And that actually rips us out of a world which we are so embedded in with biophilia, as you mentioned, but many other fundamental skills. And there are lots of analysts who have pointed out you can't come to good perceptive abilities, good awareness of the world. Children can't unless you put them in a full, environmentally rich, non-human animal rich environment. That's where we develop the skills. That's where we need to stay. And with good zoos, we have the prospect of doing that somewhat, if we will design them in ways that get rid of the dysfunctional human-centerednesses and honor the rich and good ones.
Please, Jeff Ewell.
I'm wondering if in 50 to 100 years, you think it would be necessary to have an ethicist or a bioethicist on staff at zoos, or at least in the planning stages of zoos, or if in 50 to 100 years, if we'll no longer need to do that because we'll have figured out enough things that we'll be a wiser people?
Well, I want to tease with the response. Jeff and I had a wonderful conversation last night. It would be wonderful if ethicists went extinct in this sense, that all of us became ethicists, so we didn't have to have specialists to remind us that all of us have these abilities. I do think, to take your comment as a really serious issue, I do think it's good to have that sort of a person on staff, but I think that is the leader's role from the beginning. This is an integrative function. I know leaders have other things to do, like raise funds and run administration, but that's the burden of leadership, is to set. It's what Mike Noonan does for us in ABEC. He sets a tone that has that element and nurtures that element. And it strikes me that if everybody was doing it, would we need them on staff? So I mean to be lighthearted about that, but there is a way in which what I'm saying belongs to all of us, needs to be done by all of us, so we can gladly get rid of the specialists because we're also become so adept at it ourselves. Keith.
Well, that raises a question. It raises a basic moral question about, relativist versus absolute. So if we're the moral compasses of our institution, and I'll pick on Ron and myself, and we both do a very well thought out sort of understanding of where our institution stands on things, but comes to different decisions, is that okay? That my institution might function different than his, very ethically driven, but we drew the line in different places. Is it okay to have that? Is there an absolutism here, or is it relativistic?
I'm nurtured in the study of religions. My first 3 degrees were in the study of religion. Since I'm not a particularly religious person, you can draw your conclusions from that. But the point here is that when you study multiple religious traditions, one of the things you realize, they have rich ways of engaging the world that are distinct. They can be very absolutist about their own position, but be an interfaith dialogue, constructive dialogue with different positions in a respectful way. And so the two of you can come to different conclusions, but as long as you've worked through that, look at your own biases, do the critical thinking skills, you can understand why. You get to weight the ethical value of something differently. That's not something that's in conflict. So you certainly can turn it into an asset rather than a necessary conflict. So would that we lived in a world where pluralism became an advantage, enriched us all, as opposed to people who were walking around in a fundamentalist way saying, you've got to do it my way, and if you change from that, you must be immoral. All of us recognize how destructive that is of fundamental human skills. So in that sense, Keith, I think the two of you differing probably is an asset as opposed to a disadvantage.
Sure, Jeff Bonner.
There's no such thing as a quick question about ethics, but are there transcendent ethical principles? For example, I might consider extinction the ultimate form of murder. Is that a transcendent principle, or is there no such thing?
And just as there are no easy or short ethics questions, certainly there are no short answers. There is wonderful work. Bernie Rowland, the premier veterinary ethicist, has some interesting work in his books on relativism versus non-relativism. Different kinds of relativism prevail. There are principled relativisms where you say, listen, we're in different points. Ron's in a certain position, Keith's in another position. As a matter of principle, I don't know who's right, so we're going to have to let them both conflict with each other. There's another kind of relativism, skeptical relativism. There's no truth anywhere, everything goes. Well, that's completely a morally bankrupt kind of relativism, but not principled relativism. It involves respect for complex individuals who are in the world with experiences that may be different than yours. So in one sense, there is a relativism that is a healthy reality. It's what drives the United States with its pluralism. Let's be able to say there are different values. We work it out in a democratic way, and all of us agree, all right, let's just go with the majority decision on that.
Donna Fernandez.
Well, with advanced studies in cognition and cognitive mapping, do you see a point in 50 or 100 years we'll actually be able to have a communication and a conversation with a killer whale or an elephant and get from them what are they unhappy about? Do they want to be here? Do they want to be out in the wild? I mean, what's to prevent us to be able to actually talk with them directly?
It's a wonderful question, and it's an imaginary question. It's kind of leadership in a way, just to ask the question to get people to say, could they be conversation partners? I think the answer is, I don't know. But the reason I say it this way is you're looking at the other animals' realities. Isn't that our genius? We are able to say, listen, they have their realities. Are we nimble enough? Are we nimble enough? There are what philosophers call epistemological limitations. It's hard to know what another human is doing, let alone an elephant or an orca. But are we nimble enough to say, all right, there are those limitations, but can we say something about it, like that there's intelligence, that they have limited communication abilities, and I suspect maybe it's Meredith who breaks through. For me, because, and I teach in animal studies courses, it's 95% women come in the class. I think, well, then the fundamental breakthroughs are most likely to be by women. We'll find perhaps one of the young people in this class breaks through and finds the answer to that. But I'd have to say, I don't know. But I hope so. What a rich, wonderful world to live in if that's the case.
Let me, don't go away, Paul. Let me ask, let me say, Paul raised two topics, I think. The first of which was maybe we should ask ethically whether some species should never be in zoos. That, of course, we're all dying to discuss, but let me tell you, that's specifically one of the topics for discussion on the agenda tomorrow. And so we'll wait until tomorrow to engage in that question. But you also sort of inspired this notion that zoos can raise us up, and by serving our future generations, serving our children. You made this image of serving our children well. Can you answer, like, in some prescriptive fashion, how can zoos serve our children well by raising us up as a species, us as a species?
What an interesting question. Well, there have been any number of presenters so far who've talked about certain future images of zoos, and you can see from the richness and the engagement with the multi-species world that those things taking place, just take some of the things David said or some of the things John said, for example. I think children come into a richer environment. But for me, in reflecting on this once, I thought, what child goes to the zoo today, walks up to an enclosure, notices the charismatic megafauna, as people would say, there, and then the child walks away? What child doesn't know which animal gets to walk away? There is a potential negative meta message when a child sees an animal in captivity and goes away, that the child has a sense of, I'm free, that animal's not. Now, that might not be a 3 or 4 year old's reasoning, but it will be a 5 or 6 or 7 or an 8 year old child. At some point, it's going to dawn on the individual, they're in there and we're not. So there is one species surely that doesn't belong in zoos. Us. There are some animals inappropriate to have in zoos? Us. And we know that in the early 20th century, there were some humans in zoos. So the point here is, how do we find that out? How do we educate? I hope we will educate our children in a way that opens them up to see much further than we see on this issue. We all inherited a world where captivity wasn't too problematic, especially if we do what we call welfare. Fair enough. But can we get beyond that? Can we teach our children that they can do much more with the human capabilities that every single person here brought into the room? Every one of us has these. They may be dormant, but we can energize them. And I'll tell you, there are plenty of people on the panels here who have already energized them in ways where when you listen, you think, that's amazing. John, that's amazing what you said. Some of the things you said last night, Jeff, just amazed me. And I thought, same with David, who's always a pleasure to work with. We've worked with together before, and it's a pleasure. There are humans who are already developing these, and the question is, how do we enable our children to stand on their shoulders? Ron, Kagan, surely you as well, Mike. Those are the things that are important to me, is how do we get our children to stand on our shoulders? So what are the specifics? I don't know, Mike, but I know we're capable of it.